The sound of the Starlight Gala was a symphony of power, the clinking of champagne glasses, the murmur of billion-dollar deals, and the frantic click of cameras celebrating tech wunderkind Richard Sterling. He stood at the center of it all, his arm wrapped possessively around a starlet in a dress the color of liquid fire. This was his triumph. But then the symphony hit a discordant note. Gasps silenced the crowd as it parted like the Red Sea. And there she was, his wife Catherine, 7 months pregnant and glowing with a cold, beautiful fury. And on her arm, Dominic Knight, the one man whose power eclipsed Richard's tenfold. This wasn't a confrontation. This was a declaration of war. The silence in the Fifth Avenue penthouse was a physical entity. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from threads of unspoken resentments and polished marble. Catherine Sterling moved through the cavernous rooms, her hand resting protectively on the gentle curve of her stomach, where their son, their first child, was growing. Each step echoed on the gleaming white floors, a lonely metronome, counting down the seconds of her gilded imprisonment. This home, once a symbol of their shared dreams, had become a mausoleum for a dying marriage. Richard, her husband, was a ghost in their life, long before he started sleeping in another woman's bed. He was a creature of ambition, fueled by caffeine accolades and the relentless pursuit of more. Sterling Innovations, his tech empire built on a foundation of Catherine's own early career coding and market analysis, was his true spouse. Catherine and their unborn child were merely decorative accessories, proof of a life well lived for the covers of Forbes and Fortune. The distance had started as a crack and had now become a chasm. It began with late nights at the office, which she'd understood. Then came the business trips, over weekends, the scent of a strange, cloyingly sweet perfume on his suits, and the chilling way he'd started looking through her, his eyes as vacant and reflective as the black screen of his phone. Tonight was the pinnacle of his career, the annual Starlight Gala, a charity event that was in reality a coronation. It was a celebration of Sterling Innovations' latest triumph, a revolutionary AI integration that promised to double the company's valuation. It was supposed to be their night. He had approached her that morning, not with the warmth of a husband, but with the cool, detached air of a public relations manager handling a delicate problem. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the New York skyline, all sharp angles and expensive tailoring. Catherine. He began, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. About the gala tonight. She turned from the small, half-finished nursery, a tiny pair of knitted booties in her hand. Yes, I was just deciding between the Navy Galliano or the Silver Valentino. The silver has a bit more room. She offered a small, hopeful smile. Richard didn't return it. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a nervous tic he'd developed. I don't think you should come. The booties felt heavy in her hand. What, Richard? It's the Starlight Gala. We've been planning this for months. It's our celebration. It's my celebration. He corrected the words, sharp and precise. And you? You're not looking your best. It's a long night. All the standing the cameras. It wouldn't be good for you. Or the baby. He'd weaponized her pregnancy, using the very thing that should have bound them closer as a tool of exclusion. I feel perfectly fine, she said, her voice trembling slightly. My doctor says I'm in excellent health. I want to be there to support you. Your support is noted, he said dismissively. But my decision is final. The press will be like sharks. I need to be focused on my game. I can't be worried about you fainting or needing to sit down every 5 minutes. It will look weak. It will look weak. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't concerned for her health. He was concerned about his image. A heavily pregnant wife was not the sleek, dynamic accessory he wanted on his arm tonight. She was an inconvenience, a liability. "So you'll go alone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I won't be alone. My team will be there. The board will be there," he said, walking towards the door, already mentally checked out of the conversation. "Just rest. Order in whatever you like. We'll celebrate properly when I get home." It was a lie, and they both knew it. He wouldn't be coming home not until the early hours of the morning, smelling of champagne and that same sickly sweet perfume. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence rushed back in, louder and more profound than before. Catherine stood frozen in the nursery for a long time, the skyline blurring through the tears that finally fell. She looked around at the world she had helped build. The initial seed money for Sterling Innovations had come from her inheritance. The foundational algorithms had been based on her postgraduate thesis. She had been his partner, in every sense of the word, his confidant, his strategist, his cheerleader. And now, at the peak of their shared success, she had been discarded, demoted from partner to problem. She walked back into their master bedroom, a space of cold, minimalist design that Richard had commissioned. It felt like a luxury hotel suite, impersonal and transient. On his valet stand, next to his diamond-encrusted watch, sat a small velvet box from Cartier. It wasn't for her. Her birthday had passed 2 months ago, unceremoniously marked by a floral delivery and a text message. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. With shaking fingers, she opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a delicate diamond necklace. It was the Trinity design, 3 intertwined bands of gold. It was breathtakingly beautiful. And hanging from the clasp was a small, almost microscopic tag. It was a gift receipt, tucked away carelessly. The name on the receipt was not Catherine Sterling. It was Crystal Vance. Catherine's breath hitched. Crystal Vance, the 24-year-old model-turned-influencer, whose face was plastered on every bus and billboard in the city, the current it girl, known for her scandalous social media presence and a string of high-profile, short-lived affairs with wealthy men. The scent on Richard's suits suddenly had a name. The late nights had a face. The cruelty had a reason. A wave of nausea, entirely unrelated to her pregnancy, washed over her. She stumbled back, sinking onto the edge of their perfectly made bed. The betrayal was so blatant, so utterly disrespectful, it was almost absurd. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was preparing to flaunt his infidelity on the biggest night of his career, while his pregnant wife was locked away in their penthouse like a mad woman in the attic. He thought she was weak, a fragile, hormonal creature to be managed and hidden away. He thought she would sit here, cry into a pint of ice cream, and wait for him to return with his flimsy excuses. A new feeling, cold and hard as steel, began to form in the pit of her stomach, displacing the grief. It was rage, a pure, clarifying anger that burned away the tears and the shock. He had underestimated her. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Sterling. He had forgotten the Davenport blood that ran through her veins, a lineage of quiet, determined strategists who never ever backed down from a fight. She would not be hidden. She would not be dismissed. She would not be a footnote in her own husband's success story. He wanted a night free of the inconvenience of his pregnant wife. He wanted to shine in the spotlight with his new polished accessory. Catherine stood up, her movements now steady and purposeful. She walked to her dressing room, the Cartier box clutched in her hand. A plan began to crystallize in her mind, audacious and terrifying, but utterly necessary. Richard wanted a show. She would give him one. She would give them all a show they would never forget. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over a name in her contacts she hadn't dialed in over 3 years. A name that represented a different life, a different path she could have taken. A name that commanded more respect, more power, and more fear in their world than Richard Sterling could ever hope to achieve. She pressed the call button. "Dominic," she said, her voice clear and strong, devoid of any trace of tears. "It's Catherine Sterling. I need your help, and I believe I have a proposition that will be of great interest to you." The proof had been accumulating for months, a slow poison seeping into the foundations of their marriage. It started with the small, almost negligible signs that a trusting heart might dismiss. The second phone, the one he called his international line that he guarded with the ferocity of a dragon protecting its hoard. The hushed conversations that would abruptly end the moment she entered a room. The way he began to critique her, chipping away at her confidence with casual cruelty. Her taste in art was provincial. Her choice of friends, unambitious. Her pregnancy body, matronly. Each comment was a tiny paper cut, insignificant on its own, but collectively they had left her bleeding. The discovery of the Cartier box was merely the final damning confirmation. Holding the receipt with Crystal Vance's name printed in neat corporate script was like holding a death certificate for her marriage. All the abstract fears and whispered anxieties had coalesced into this one tangible, soul-crushing piece of evidence. After her call to Dominic Knight, Catherine moved with a chilling, newfound clarity. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in her chest, but it was now encased in a shell of pure, unadulterated resolve. She laid the Cartier box on her dressing table, a shrine to her husband's treachery. For the next hour she became a detective in the ruins of her own life. She had always respected Richard's privacy, a courtesy he had clearly not extended to her. That boundary was now obliterated. She went to his home office, a sleek chamber of glass and chrome overlooking Central Park. His personal laptop was open on the desk. In the past, she would never have dreamed of touching it. Now she sat down without hesitation. It was password protected, of course. She tried their anniversary. Access denied. She tried his mother's birthday. Access denied. Then a bitter smile touched her lips. She typed in the launch date of the AI project that was being celebrated tonight. Welcome, Richard Sterling. It was sickeningly easy. His digital life was a roadmap of his deceit. There was a dedicated email folder cleverly labeled Project Starburst, a name so generic she'd never thought to question it. Inside were not project timelines or corporate memos, but a torrent of messages between him and Crystal. Can't wait to have you on my arm tonight. The whole world will see you, he had written just this morning. They'll all be so jealous, Crystal had replied, her message punctuated with a string of champagne bottle emojis. Especially the frumpy wife you keep hidden away. Is she still locked in the tower? Catherine felt the bile rise in her throat. Frumpy. Hidden away. They were mocking her, laughing at her from their digital playground. She scrolled further, her eyes scanning flight confirmations to St. Bart's receipts from Michelin-starred restaurants she had begged to go to, and most damningly, a series of emails with a high-end jeweler. They were discussing designs for an engagement ring. He was planning to leave her. After the baby was born, after the media buzz from his latest launch died down, he was going to discard her and their newborn child to start a new, shinier life with his model. The plan wasn't just to cheat. It was to replace. She dug deeper, her mind, once celebrated, for its ability to find patterns in complex data sets, now sifting through the wreckage of her personal life. She found financial statements. A new folder on a shared drive, this one password, protected with a strength Richard usually reserved for corporate secrets. But Richard was arrogant, and his arrogance made him predictable. The password was Crystal is Queen 2025. Inside was the final betrayal. He had been siphoning funds from a joint account, the one funded by her inheritance, into a new private trust. The beneficiary, Crystal Vance. He was using Catherine's family money to build a future for her replacement. He was not just breaking her heart. He was robbing her blind. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. He had woven a web of lies, so thick and so comprehensive that he believed himself untouchable. He believed she was too preoccupied with her pregnancy, too emotionally fragile, too stupid to ever uncover the truth. She methodically downloaded everything. The emails, the financial records, the travel itineraries. She saved them to a small encrypted flash drive that she kept on her keychain, a relic from her old life in cybersecurity. Knowledge was power, and she was now armed with an arsenal. This evidence changed everything. Her initial plan to simply show up at the gala and embarrass him now seemed naive, insufficient. This wasn't just a marital squabble. It was a calculated campaign of emotional and financial warfare. He had declared war on her, and she would respond in kind. This was why her call to Dominic Knight was so crucial. Dominic wasn't just a powerful man. He was Richard's primary business rival. Knight Enterprises and Sterling Innovations were the two titans of the tech industry, constantly vying for market share, talent, and prestige. But their rivalry was more than professional. There was a personal animosity there, rooted in a deal years ago, where Richard had publicly and unscrupulously poached a key team from Dominic's R&D division. Dominic Knight was a man who never forgot a slight. Her history with Dominic was purely professional, but profound. 3 years before she met Richard Catherine, then Catherine Davenport was a rising star in data analytics. Knight Enterprises had commissioned her consulting firm for a high-stakes predictive market analysis. She had worked directly with Dominic for 6 intense weeks. He was brilliant, demanding, and possessed an integrity she had found both intimidating and deeply admirable. He had seen her talent, truly seen it in a way Richard never had. He'd offered her a senior position at his company, a golden opportunity. She had turned it down. A week later, she met Richard at a tech conference. He was charming, visionary, and relentless in his pursuit of her. He had swept her off her feet, convincing her that their partnership, both personal and professional, would change the world. She had chosen love, or what she thought was love, over the career path Dominic had offered. A part of her had always wondered, what if now that choice felt like the greatest mistake of her life? When she had called him, his initial response was one of polite, professional concern. But as she laid out the situation, not as a scorned wife, but as a strategic asset, the tone of the conversation shifted. "He's using my inheritance to fund his mistress and hiding assets," she had stated, her voice devoid of self-pity. But more importantly, Richard's new AI integration, the one he's celebrating tonight, has a critical flaw. A backdoor vulnerability I warned him about in the initial design phase. He ignored me, said it was an acceptable risk to push the launch forward. There was a pause on the other end of the line. She could almost hear the gears turning in Dominic's formidable brain. "Go on," he said, his voice now sharp with interest. "He's over-leveraged the company to fund this launch." She continued, pacing the length of the vast living room. "He's counting on a flawless rollout to secure the next round of funding. If news of this vulnerability were to get out, especially from a credible source, his stock would plummet before the markets even open tomorrow. He'd be ruined." "And you are that credible source," Dominic finished for her. "You have the original design documents you authored." "I do," she confirmed. "I want to be there tonight, Dominic. I will not be the woman he hides. But if I go alone, I'm a tragic figure, a victim. The media will pity me. If I go with you, I'm a threat. I'm a queen arriving to reclaim her kingdom." The silence stretched for a moment longer. Then a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. It was a sound of pure predatory appreciation. "He called your pregnancy a liability that would make him look weak," Dominic mused, recalling what she had told him. "I think, Catherine, you are about to become his single greatest liability. My car will be there for you at 8 o'clock sharp. Wear something magnificent." The call ended. Catherine slipped the encrypted drive into her purse. The unveiling of the betrayal was complete. Now came the reckoning. The black Bentley, sleek and silent as a panther, pulled up to the curb precisely at 8 Morse p.m. It was an emissary from a world of real power, a stark contrast to Richard's flashy, custom-painted Lamborghini, a vehicle designed to scream for attention. Dominic Knight's car whispered it. Catherine had spent the preceding hours in a whirlwind of focused activity. The tears were done. The shock had hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. She had called her personal lawyer a shrewd older woman named Ms. Albright and had her draw up immediate divorce and asset-freezing petitions ready to be filed the moment the markets opened in the morning. Every document she had downloaded from Richard's computer was now securely in her lawyer's possession. Then she had turned her attention to her own transformation. She had dismissed the stylist Richard employed, a woman who always dressed her in soft, muted pastels clothes that made her fade into the background. Instead, she went to the back of her cavernous closet, to a section that had been untouched for years. There she found what she was looking for, a gown she had bought for a gala she was supposed to attend with Dominic Knight 3 years ago, before she'd cancelled to go on her first date with Richard. It was a creation of deep, emerald green silk, a colour that symbolized rebirth and wealth. It was daring with a slash of a neckline that was elegant yet unapologetic, and it was masterfully tailored to drape over her 7-month baby bump, not hiding it, but celebrating it, framing it as a source of power and life. It was the dress of a queen, not a victim. She paired it with the Davenport emeralds, a family heirloom that her mother had given her jewelry that held more history and quiet dignity than anything Richard had ever purchased. When she descended in the private elevator to the building's lobby, the driver, a stoic man in a perfectly tailored suit, opened the door for her without a word, his expression unreadable but respectful. The interior of the Bentley was a cocoon of soft leather and polished burr walnut. The drive to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the gala was being held, was short. Dominic was waiting for her not inside the car, but on the sidewalk, standing just outside the cordon of press and onlookers. The sight of him caused a stir. Dominic Knight rarely attended these events. His presence alone was a news story. He was exactly as she remembered, tall and impeccably dressed in a classic black tuxedo that made him look less like a businessman and more like a statesman. His dark hair was threaded with distinguished silver at the temples, and his eyes, a piercing shade of grey, missed nothing. They held a glint of wry intelligence, and something else, a quiet, unwavering intensity. He turned as she stepped out of the car, and his eyes swept over her. There was no pity in his gaze, only a deep, profound respect that she realized she had been starving for. "Catherine," he said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the city noise. "You look magnificent. The colour of money, I thought." She replied, a small, wry smile touching her lips for the first time that day. He offered her his arm. "And revenge." His own smile was thin, but genuine. As she took his arm, she felt a current of solid, unshakable strength. It wasn't the volatile, performative power that Richard projected. It was the quiet, bedrock certainty of a man who had built an empire and had nothing to prove. Instead of heading straight for the red carpet, he guided her to a quiet spot by the fountain, shielded from the majority of the press. The flashes of cameras were a frantic, strobing backdrop to their conversation. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his grey eyes searching hers. "Once we walk up those steps, there is no going back. The story will be written by them." He gestured towards the media scrum. "And we can only guide the narrative, not control it." "I am more than ready," Catherine said, her voice steady. "He made this public, not me. He chose this venue to humiliate me. He is the one who will have to live with the consequences of his own arrogance." "Good." Dominic nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "My team is in place. I have 2 of the most influential business columnists from the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times at my table. When you give the signal, I'll make sure they are listening." "The signal?" she asked. "Yes. Richard will undoubtedly cause a scene. He is a narcissist, and narcissists cannot stand to have their spotlight stolen. He will approach you. When he does, I want you to say one thing. Ask him, is Project Starburst secure? That's all. I will handle the rest." Project Starburst, the name of the email folder where he kept his love letters to his mistress. It was a perfect coded strike. To any outsider it would sound like a concerned business question. To Richard it would be a clear, unmistakable message: I know everything. "And the information about the backdoor vulnerability?" she asked. "My cybersecurity division is already running a quiet diagnostic on the public-facing code. They believe they have found the exploit you described. We won't leak it, not yet. We will let Richard sweat. Tomorrow Ms. Albright will file your petitions. At the same time, my acquisitions team will send a confidential low-ball offer to the Sterling Innovations Board to buy a controlling interest in the company, citing grave concerns about leadership stability and product integrity. We will present them with the evidence of his financial malfeasance and the security flaw. The board will be forced to choose: protect their CEO or protect their investment. I assure you they will choose their investment." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. This was more than she could have ever orchestrated on her own. He wasn't just helping her. He was mounting a full-scale corporate takeover, using her intelligence as the tip of the spear. "Why are you doing all of this, Dominic?" she asked, genuinely needing to know. "This is an enormous risk for you, too." He looked away for a moment, his gaze fixed on the magnificent floodlit facade of the museum. 3 years ago, I told you that your talent was being wasted. I offered you a chance to build something real. You chose him. I respected your choice, but I never respected the man. I despise bullies, Catherine, and I have a long-standing policy against allowing arrogant fools to control technology that has the potential to be world-changing. He is a liability to the entire industry. Removing him is not just good for you, it's good for business. He then turned back to her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. And besides, he added, his voice quieter now, I am also a man who believes that loyalty and brilliance should be rewarded. You possess both. Consider this a long overdue job offer. When this is over, I'm creating a new R&D division focused on ethical AI, and I want you to run it. Tears pricked at the back of Catherine's eyes, but this time they were not tears of sorrow or betrayal. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and a fierce, surging sense of hope. He wasn't saving her. He was empowering her. He was handing her the tools to save herself. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and met his gaze. The alliance was forged. It wasn't born of pity or romance, but of something far stronger, mutual respect and shared strategic interest. It was an alliance forged in the cold, hard steel of the corporate world. "I accept," she said simply. Dominic Knight smiled a true, confident smile that reached his eyes. "I thought you might." "Now," he said, tucking her arm more securely in his. "Shall we make an entrance?" Together they turned away from the fountain and began their slow, deliberate walk toward the grand staircase and the sea of flashing lights, ready to step into the heart of the storm. The grand hall of the museum had been transformed into a celestial wonderland. Thousands of tiny, twinkling lights were strung from the impossibly high ceiling, mimicking a star-filled night sky. Towering arrangements of white orchids and delphiniums stood like spectral sentinels between tables draped in silver linen. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, constant hum of 100 conversations, the sound of power and money schmoozing. Richard Sterling was holding court near the magnificent multi-tiered champagne fountain. He was in his element, a peacock displaying its full plumage. Dressed in a Tom Ford tuxedo with a velvet jacket, the color of midnight, he radiated an almost blinding aura of self-satisfaction. On his arm, Crystal Vance was a vision in fire engine red. The slinky, backless dress clung to her surgically perfected figure, and the Trinity necklace, Catherine's necklace, sparkled at her throat, a beacon of their shared treachery. They were the undisputed center of attention. Richard's booming laugh echoed through the hall as he accepted congratulations from fawning investors and nervous competitors. Crystal, meanwhile, played her part to perfection. She gazed up at him with doe-eyed adoration, laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, and posed for the roving photographers with a practiced predatory pout. She was not a guest. She was a statement, a living, breathing trophy that screamed of Richard's virility and success. The whispers followed them everywhere. "Is that Crystal Vance? I thought she was in Ibiza?" A woman with a severe facelift murmured to her companion behind a feathered fan. "Sterling actually did it. He brought his mistress to the gala," a portly banking executive whispered to his colleague. "His wife is due any day now, isn't she? The man has balls of solid brass." "Or a brain of solid rock," the colleague retorted, shaking his head. "This is career suicide. What is he thinking?" But Richard heard none of it, or if he did, he interpreted the shock as admiration. He was high on his own success, insulated by a fortress of ego. He believed he was rewriting the rules that his genius in the boardroom exempted him from the common decencies of life. He clinked his champagne flute against Crystal's. "To us?" he said, his voice low and intimate, loud enough only for her to hear. "The new power couple." "And to leaving the past in the past," she purred, her eyes flicking around the room, cataloguing the designer gowns and priceless jewelry, already seeing them as her own. She felt a thrill of victory. She had won. She had supplanted the quiet, intellectual wife. She was the one standing here in the spotlight beside the man of the hour. The announcement of his keynote address was imminent. The CEO of the museum's board of trustees was already walking towards the stage, preparing to introduce him. This was the crescendo of Richard's evening, the moment he would cement his legacy as a visionary, a titan, a king. And then it happened. A subtle shift in the room's energy, a change in the atmospheric pressure. It started near the grand entrance. A few heads turned, then a few more. The low hum of conversation faltered. A single audible gasp cut through the air. The whispers that had been trailing Richard and Crystal suddenly changed direction, coalescing into a tidal wave of shocked murmurs that rolled through the grand hall. The crowd began to part. Not with the grudging deference given to a celebrity, but with the stunned, almost reverent awe usually reserved for royalty. Richard felt the shift immediately. The invisible spotlight that had been warming his face was suddenly gone, drawn away by a more powerful magnetic force. He turned his brow furrowed in annoyance. Who would dare upstage him on his night? What he saw made the champagne in his stomach turn to ice. There, framed by the magnificent archway, was Catherine. She was not the woman he had left that morning, the pale, tear-streaked wife in a cashmere robe. This was a different creature entirely. The emerald green of her gown was so vibrant, it seemed to draw all the light in the room towards it. The Davenport emeralds at her throat and ears glittered with a cold, aristocratic fire. Her pregnancy, which he had deemed a flaw, was presented as a majestic centerpiece, a symbol of undeniable power and continuity. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was flawless, highlighting the defiant strength in her eyes and the resolute set of her jaw. She was breathtaking. She was terrifying, and she was not alone. On her arm was Dominic Knight. If Catherine's appearance was a shock, Dominic's was a cataclysm. The room fell into a stunned, almost complete silence. Photographers who had been swarming Richard and Crystal just moments before practically trampled each other as they scrambled backwards, their lenses swiveling to capture this impossible, electrifying new development. The flashbulbs erupted in a frantic, blinding volley. Dominic Knight, the reclusive billionaire, the undisputed emperor of the tech world at a gala celebrating his chief rival, and with his rival's pregnant wife on his arm. It was a scenario so scandalous, so pregnant with meaning, that no one could process it. The whispers erupted anew, no longer quiet, but urgent and frenzied. My God, is that Dominic Knight? With Catherine Sterling, what is going on? Did you see the look on Richard's face? He looks like he's seen a ghost. This is better than the opera. Crystal's perfectly manicured hand tightened on Richard's arm. Richard, what is she doing here? And why is she with him? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. The adoration in her eyes had been replaced by a raw, naked panic. Her victory suddenly felt hollow, premature. She was a cheap firework next to a supernova. Richard couldn't answer. He couldn't move. His mind was struggling to compute the scene before him. Catherine, who was supposed to be at home crying, here, looking like a warrior queen. And Dominic Knight, his nemesis, looking as smug and immovable as a mountain. It didn't make sense. The carefully constructed script for his perfect night had just been set on fire. He watched, paralyzed, as Catherine and Dominic began to move through the room. They didn't rush. They glided. Dominic nodded curtly to a few stunned acquaintances, but his attention was entirely on Catherine, guiding her with a gentle but firm hand on the small of her back. They were a portrait of unity and strength. Every eye in the room followed them, a silent, captivated audience to a drama that was unfolding in real time. They weren't heading for a secluded corner. They were heading directly for the main stage, for the table of honor, right at the front, Richard's table. The Gala of Whispers had found its climax, and the entire glittering, powerful world of New York society held its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision. The journey across the Grand Hall was the longest walk of Catherine's life. With each step, she could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on her. The air crackled with unspoken questions. She kept her chin high, her gaze fixed forward, focusing on the rhythmic tap of her heels against the polished floor. Dominic's hand was a warm, steady presence at her back, a silent anchor in the swirling vortex of gossip and speculation. She did not look at Richard, not yet. She denied him that power. Instead, she allowed her gaze to sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of people she knew. She saw surprise, confusion, and in the eyes of a few women she'd once considered friends, a flicker of something that looked like admiration. They had all seen her slow erasure from Richard's life. They had whispered about it at charity luncheons and spa days. Tonight they were witnessing her resurrection. As they approached the head table, the small circle of Sterling Innovations board members and their wives fell silent, their smiles frozen on their faces. They looked from Richard to Catherine, and back again, their expressions a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. Richard finally found his voice, a choked, strangled thing. "Catherine, what the hell are you doing here?" He moved to intercept them, his body physically blocking their path to the table. Crystal remained glued to his side, her face a mask of fury, the sparkling necklace at her throat suddenly looking cheap and gaudy. Catherine stopped positioning herself directly in front of her husband. She finally met his eyes, and the cold fury in her gaze made him flinch. "You must be mistaken, Richard," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the tense silence. "My invitation said the Starlight Gala. This is the right place, isn't it?" Her eyes flicked dismissively towards Crystal. "Though I see you've brought the evening's entertainment." The insult delivered with such icy precision landed like a slap. Crystal's face flushed a blotchy, furious red. "I am his guest," she spat. "I'm sure you are," Catherine replied, not even bothering to look at her again. Her attention was solely on Richard. "I told you to stay home," Richard hissed, trying to keep his voice low, but the fury was making it tremble. "I told you that you weren't well enough." "Oh, but I've never felt better," Catherine said, placing a hand on her stomach. "My son and I decided we couldn't miss his father's big night. We wanted to be here to support you." She infused the word support with a heavy, menacing irony. Dominic Knight had remained silent until now, a towering, observant presence. He stepped forward slightly, his shadow falling over Richard. He didn't say a word to Richard. He simply looked down at him, a silent, contemptuous dismissal that was more insulting than any verbal tirade. Then he turned to the gaping board members. "Gentlemen," Dominic said, his voice a smooth, commanding baritone. "Mrs. Sterling was feeling a bit under the weather earlier, so I offered her a ride. I trust you have room for 2 more at your table." It was not a request, it was a command. The chairman of the board, a man named Gerald Whitney, paled and began stammering. "Of course, Mr. Knight, of course, an honor." Richard felt control slipping through his fingers like sand. Dominic Knight was at his table with his wife. His masterpiece of a night was turning into a public crucifixion. He had to regain control. "This is a private table, Dominic," Richard snarled, "and this is a family matter." "It seems to me," Dominic replied, his voice dangerously soft, "that you made it a public matter the moment you walked in here with this person." He gave Crystal a look of such profound disgust that she physically recoiled. "Catherine is your wife and the mother of your heir. She belongs here. The question is, does she—" He gestured vaguely at Crystal. The air was electric. Guests at nearby tables were shamelessly craning their necks to hear. The photographers were in a frenzy, their flashes creating a non-stop disorienting strobe effect. This was the moment. The signal. Catherine looked directly into Richard's panicked, furious eyes. She leaned in slightly, as if sharing an intimate secret, and pitched her voice just low enough so that only he and those at the table could hear clearly. "You're right, Richard. We should be celebrating your success. After all, so much is riding on it," she said, her voice a silken threat. "Tell me, is Project Starburst secure?" The reaction was instantaneous. The blood drained from Richard's face. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. The name, the intimate secret name of his affair, of his betrayal, spoken from his wife's lips in this public forum, was a devastating blow. It was a direct hit below the waterline. He understood immediately. She knew. She knew everything. The carefully compartmentalized worlds he had built had just collided and exploded. He stared at her speechless. All the bluster, all the arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out man in a state of shock. Dominic Knight saw his opening. He turned to Gerald Whitney, the board chairman, and the two business columnists he had invited to his table, who had now conveniently drifted closer to the unfolding drama. "Richard looks a bit shaken," Dominic observed conversationally, a predator toying with its prey. "He's put everything on the line for this new launch. An admirable risk. But I've been hearing some whispers on the street, concerns about product integrity. If something were to go wrong, if there was a vulnerability, for example, the fallout would be catastrophic for his investors, wouldn't it?" Gerald Whitney began to sweat profusely. The coded language was clear. Dominic Knight, the most powerful man in their industry, was publicly questioning the viability of Richard's flagship product, right in front of the press and the board. Richard finally stammered, There are no vulnerabilities. The system is flawless." "Is it?" Catherine asked softly, her gaze unwavering. "Because I seem to recall a conversation we had about a potential backdoor in the primary authentication algorithm. I hope you fixed it. It would be a shame for everything you've built to be so insecure." She had just confirmed it. The wife, the co-founder, the woman who had written the original code, was backing up Dominic's whispers. It was no longer a rumor. It was an insider threat. The grand entrance was complete. Catherine hadn't needed to scream or cause a scene. With just a few well-chosen words, she had eviscerated her husband's credibility, terrified his board, and planted a seed of doubt that would grow into a forest of financial panic. She had stolen his spotlight, not by being louder, but by being smarter. The announcer on stage, oblivious to the high-stakes drama, chose that exact moment to tap the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats. It is my great honor to introduce the man of the hour, the visionary CEO of Sterling Innovations, Mr. Richard Sterling." A smattering of confused applause rippled through the hall. Richard stood frozen, a deer in the headlights, the blood roaring in his ears. His big moment had arrived, but his kingdom was already crumbling around him. Richard Sterling's keynote address was a disaster. The confident, charismatic visionary the world expected was replaced by a stammering, sweating man who looked like he'd just witnessed his own funeral. He fumbled his notes, repeated himself, and his eyes kept darting nervously towards the head table, where Catherine sat with an expression of serene composure, occasionally murmuring something to Dominic Knight that would make him nod gravely. Every word Richard spoke about security innovation and a flawless future was rendered meaningless by the scene unfolding before the audience. The power in the room had shifted so palpably it was almost a physical force. It no longer resided with the man on the stage. It sat at the table with his wife and his rival. The whispers during the speech were no longer about his affair, but about the stability of his company. "Did you hear what Knight said? Vulnerability?" And his wife confirmed it. "She was his original programmer, you know. My fund has a 9-figure position in Sterling Innovations. I need to call my broker. Now." By the time Richard finished his truncated speech to weak, uncertain applause, the damage was done. Several high-profile investors were already slipping out of the gala, their faces grim as they furiously typed on their phones. Richard stumbled back to the table, his face ashen. Crystal, who had been left standing awkwardly by the champagne fountain, rushed to his side. "Richard, do something," she hissed. "They're all looking at us. She's ruining everything." But Richard barely heard her. He stared at Catherine, his expression a toxic cocktail of hatred and fear. "You," he seethed. "You did this to ruin me." Catherine took a delicate sip of her water. "No, Richard," she said, her voice cool and even. "You did this to yourself. I'm just here to make sure the truth has a spotlight, too." Dominic Knight stood up a signal that their part in the evening was over. "Catherine, I believe we've seen enough. I'll have my driver take you home." He then looked down at Richard, his eyes glinting like chips of ice. "Enjoy what's left of your evening, Sterling. I suspect you have a busy day ahead of you tomorrow." With that, he and Catherine turned and walked away, leaving a crater of chaos in their wake. Their exit was as powerful as their entrance. They had not come to plead or to fight. They had come to deliver a message, and with their mission accomplished, they simply left. The moment they were gone, the table was descended upon by the two business columnists. "Mr. Sterling, can you comment on the security concerns raised by Mr. Knight? Is it true your wife, a co-founder, warned of a fatal flaw in your new AI?" Richard pushed past them, grabbing Crystal's arm and dragging her towards the exit. "No comment," he yelled, his composure completely shattered. The gala his coronation had become his public humiliation. The flashbulbs followed him out, not capturing a triumphant CEO, but a panicked man fleeing the scene of his own downfall. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The first pre-market trading indicators from the Asian markets showed Sterling Innovations stock in a nosedive. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opened at 9:30 a.m., it was a bloodbath. The stock plunged over 40% in the first hour, wiping out billions of dollars in market capitalization. At 9:35 a.m., Ms. Albright filed the divorce petition, citing infidelity and financial fraud. Simultaneously, she filed an emergency motion to freeze all of Richard and Catherine's joint assets, effectively cutting him off from the fortune he had been using to fund his affair. At 10:00 a.m., the Sterling Innovations Board of Directors received a formal confidential offer from Knight Enterprises. The offer was to acquire a 51% controlling stake in the company at a fraction of its value from the previous day. The offer was accompanied by a discreet but detailed dossier compiled by Dominic's team and featuring Catherine's evidence. It laid out Richard's embezzlement from joint accounts and provided a preliminary technical report on the backdoor vulnerability in the new AI system. The message was clear: your CEO is a fraud, and your flagship product is compromised. Your stock is in freefall. We are your only way out. Richard was in his office, frantically screaming at his PR team, when Gerald Whitney and two other board members walked in without knocking. Their faces were grim. "Richard, we need to talk," Gerald said, his voice heavy. "Talk. We need to issue a statement. We need to sue Knight for market manipulation. We need to destroy her." Richard raged, pacing like a caged animal. "No, Richard," Gerald said, placing the Knight Enterprises offer on his desk. "What we need is your resignation, effective immediately." Richard stared at the document, his mouth agape. "My resignation? This is my company. You can't do this." "We can and we are," another board member said coldly. "You have exposed this company to catastrophic financial and reputational risk. You lied to us about the integrity of the AI, and you have become a public relations nightmare. The board has held an emergency vote. We are accepting Mr. Knight's offer. It's the only way to stabilize the stock and save the company from complete collapse." The power play was complete. It had been executed with the swift, ruthless precision of a military strike. Catherine's inside knowledge, combined with Dominic's corporate power, had created an unstoppable force. Richard had been so focused on the personal betrayal that he had completely failed to see the professional checkmate until it was too late. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn. Later that day, a broken and defeated Richard returned to the Fifth Avenue penthouse to find the locks changed. A stoic security guard handed him a box containing a few personal effects and a legal notice informing him that he was barred from the premises pending the divorce settlement. He tried to call Crystal. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He checked her social media. Her feed, once filled with fawning pictures of him and his gifts, had been scrubbed clean. There was a new post, a picture of her at the airport captioned, "Off to new adventures, so important to cut toxic people out of your life. Self-care new beginnings." She had abandoned the sinking ship without a second thought, the Trinity necklace likely already in a pawn shop. Richard Sterling, the billionaire visionary, the man of the hour, was left with nothing. He stood alone on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, a pariah in a Tom Ford suit, staring up at the home he could no longer enter, his empire and his life utterly and irrevocably destroyed. 6 months later, Catherine Davenport stood in her corner office at Knight Enterprises, watching the first snow of winter dust the skyline. She was no longer Catherine Sterling, the billionaire's wife. She was the director of the new Ethical AI Development Division, a title earned through sheer brilliance. In a quiet corner, her son Daniel slept peacefully in his bassinet, a symbol of her new beginning. The past half-year had been a whirlwind of methodical reconstruction. Her division was already making waves, turning the very vulnerability Richard had ignored into a revolutionary security protocol. She had transformed a weapon used against her into a shield for the world. The divorce had been swift and final. Faced with irrefutable proof of his fraud, Richard was left a disgraced cautionary tale, his attempts to launch a new firm failing spectacularly, as no investor would touch him. Crystal Vance had vanished just as quickly, her social media showing a new life in Dubai, forever chasing the next fortune. A soft knock on the door brought Dominic Knight into the room, holding 2 cups of coffee. Their partnership had settled into one of deep mutual respect. "I saw the news about Richard's firm," he said, gently handing her a cup. "He built his empire on a foundation of lies. It was always going to collapse." Catherine nodded, gazing at her sleeping son. "Some people never learn that trust, once broken, can't be bought back." She turned to Dominic, her expression sincere. "Thank you for everything, for believing in me." He met her gaze, his own eyes filled with admiration. "Catherine, I didn't save you. I just opened the door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it, to build all of this." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She looked from Daniel's peaceful face to the sprawling city outside a city that was once her prison and was now her kingdom. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a very long time, she knew with absolute certainty that she was the one holding the pen. So what's the real takeaway from Catherine's incredible story? It's a harsh reminder that in the world of the ultra-wealthy, love and business can become a brutal battleground, and a public image is a weapon that can be turned against you in a heartbeat. Catherine didn't just get revenge, she executed a flawless corporate and personal coup. She proved that the greatest power isn't money or fame, but intelligence, strategy, and the courage to reclaim your own narrative. She turned her deepest wound into her greatest victory, reminding us all that the person you underestimate is often the one you should fear the most. Do you think Richard got what he deserved? What would you have done in Catherine's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were on the edge of your seat through this whole saga, make sure to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a tale of epic payback, and please subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are wilder than any movie. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update.